minutes each, strictly, to come back on those.
Okay, I'm not going to try and answer the questions. I'll talk on some of the themes that have kind of been raised. Specific question, I'll go back to Roderick about new technology, will that be the end of capitalism? Well, no, but it wasn't the end of feudalism either. Actually, because social relations changed first, then the technologies were imposed on the changed social relations, and that would be the same thing under capitalism. The technologies don't change the relations, they have to be changed first. It's a very long, complex argument of thing to elaborate. One thing I will say, though, is just only about the question of the party, which I posed and we discussed. I mean, I think it makes a kind of empirical sense to say that if you've been trying to do something for 100 years and it hasn't worked at any point, except once in 1917, there's probably something wrong with the model you're using. I mean, I think it's, it isn't because we're not selling enough papers or something. There's something wrong with the idea of building a mass revolutionary party in a non-revolutionary situation. What I think you can do is build a cadre, a revolutionary cadre of people who are trusted, who work together, who work in trade unions and movements, who are respected by people who work with, who can act as a leadership in a situation where that becomes important. It's actually not true to say that revolutionary parties have to be built before the revolution. Actually, the Bolshevik party was built in the revolution. It wasn't built beforehand. This is nonsense to say this. But anyway, this is a long historical argument. But I think the model we've been using since 1956 or 1968 clearly has to be rethought in some ways, because it just hasn't worked anywhere. Even in Britain, which is the best chance at achieving it, it hasn't worked. So there's something going on. It's not just because we aren't working hard enough, it's because there's something kind of problematic with the way it's done. What would revolutionaries do in office? This is important, because back to what Jamie said as well. I mean, you can't just go in, and this is my joke about conjugating the word betray. They're going to betray you, they're betraying you. Look, they betrayed you. Ha ha, wonderful. We can all pat them on the back and perform us have betrayed us yet again. If a revolutionary, or a party including the revolutionaries in it, gets elected, what do they do? What's the programme? What actual policies would you carry out? It's one thing to look at Syriza, which is a very extreme situation. But a revolution won't happen in a week, or a day, or a month. It'll take a process of years. I mean, this is one thing Colin used to say, which I agree about, is that the revolution in the West will be a prolonged process. It will involve governments, left governments, more left governments, pushes back and so on. In that time, it's the job of revolutionaries to actually push through legislation and stuff to make things better, strengthen the working class and so on. You have to have a programme for this. You have some idea what you would do. Instead of just going, we are not reformists, Well, yeah, okay, but I mean, nevertheless, unless you expect the insurrections to happen and the final Trump to be like that, there has to be a sort of prolonged process going on. And I think that's what we need to think about. What would that mean? I don't have the answer to that. I mean, I think that's some strategic thinking needs to go on in relation to that. The question of, so it's a process, I think is the point I'm trying to make. The point about the workplace, I mean, in a sense, it was easy to think of yourself as working class in the initial formation of industrial capitalism. It was quite bloody clear who the classes were and who the bosses were and so on. The whole point about the welfare state, the development of different types of labour, different types of employment, is that immediate identification of the polarised classes has been eroded to a certain extent and has to be recreated politically. I mean, I think the point you made, point yourself, Matt, I think it has to be something that you actually, in a sense, have to create in people, that they understand themselves to be, not just a kind of class position good against the bosses. I mean, Charlie's right, obviously people do have some sense of that, but an actual conception as a member of a working class has to be actually argued through, not injected from outside, the way those caricatures of what is to be done put it, but actually it's something you've got to constitute it through politics. And that seems to be the role of revolutionary socialists, in a sense, to do that. We used to be able to rely on social democracy. We used to be able to rely on it because, in a sense, we agreed with things about social democracy. We had different strategies, different paths, but we knew that people shared certain basic socialist positions, and that working class people shared those positions. That's being eroded now. It's why people say, we are a movement, we are the people, we are the multitude, because the kind of common sense assumptions about class that people would have had actually don't exist in quite the same kind of way. So they can only be recreated consciously. Right? And this, as I say, is basically the role of parties to do. Why hasn't there been a revolution in the West? There hasn't been. I mean, think about it, seriously. There have been no successful revolution in the West that have not been against dictatorships or in conditions of war and absolute collapse. I mean, we've got something approaching a revolutionary situation. So we have to rethink this in terms of Gramsci and all the rest of it, and what are the conditions in which this would actually happen. I suggested there were 3 moments in the 20th century where you got a conjunctural thing on a global scale where you had revolutionary possibilities, and that occurred in Britain as well. In 1919-20, what were the conjunctures? Ireland, suffragettes, the class struggle of workers. What happened in 72? Ireland, the women's movement, the class struggle, plus students and other things as well, like initial struggles for black liberation. What's going to happen now? Well, Scotland, the EU, migrants, the struggle of new workers and non-unionised workers and so on, so the new conjunction, not just here actually, but in other parts of Europe as well. One final thing, and it's why I'm actually quite optimistic, the way you may have got that impression, it's about Scotland. I mean, I'm not saying that the final moments of a referendum campaign were a revolutionary moment in Scottish history. That would be ridiculous. But something like the feeling of what it would be like in a pre-revolutionary situation was present in Scotland in the final months before the referendum. The enthusiasm, the way people went and just did stuff, produced leaflets, but did, who would never been politically involved at all in their lives, enthused, and they wanted it. They wanted something to change, and they saw this was a way of doing it. We don't agree this was the way to do it, but actually it instilled them in some idea of their own capacity to do things. People in small villages who'd never done anything, producing their own posters, their own leaflets, organising meetings, getting people together, this kind of stuff. That's what the beginning of a revolutionary process will feel like. Unfortunately, in England there hasn't been something like that yet, and in Scotland we're still high on the effects of it. But it's possible that something like that could happen here, not over a referendum on national independence, obviously, but something on housing, something on health. I don't know what the issue will be, but the point is it can happen. And when it happens, people will want to do the same things they did in Scotland over a different issue. They'll feel inspired, they'll want to get involved in it. We have to be able to encourage that and work with people in it. And above all, understand that it is possible.
Three things I thought I should pick up. First, in relation to what Jamie said. I think you misrepresented me by saying that I dismiss Syriza and Podemos. But I think that we need, because apart from anything else, particularly in the case of Podemos, less perhaps in the case of Syriza, clearly Podemos and other political organisations which have also emerged now are the product of a movement in society in any case. The problem, my feeling about them is that I'm worried about them, and that I'm worried that people will be demoralised if they fail and if they're weak. That's the standpoint from which I'm coming. The comrade right at the back who asked me about whether I was right about smashing the state, but then I think you misunderstand. Maybe we should go to the pub and discuss this further. But it is not a question of saying we want to smash the state immediately. I am not in favour of going out and marching up the street shouting, smash the state. Okay, I think it would be silly to use that well-known revolutionary term. The smashing of the state is a horizon to which one wishes to move, and it is the climax, a political climax of a long drawn-out process. And it arises in the end. I mean, the only case that we really know about where it arises very clearly is the case of the Russian Revolution. And it arose quite rightly as a defensive measure. The establishment of Soviet power was announced as a defensive measure against moves by the right to shut the Soviets down. They said, you're not going to shut us down, we're taking power to stop you shutting us down. It was a tactical, it was a very important moment, but nonetheless it's at the end of a process through which workers had gradually come to value the Soviets more, to see that there was no other way of resolving the crisis and so on. But I think the most interesting part of the discussion from the floor was the whole thing that was raised in different ways, by Shanice asking, what the hell do we do as revolutionaries? By Raymond asking about workplaces and what you do in them and so on. And one of the questions which somebody asked, which was, why was it that the movements of 2011, and you think about the most important moments of them, the Tunisian and the Egyptian revolutions, the M15, the 15M movement in Spain, the Occupy movement and so on, and the story is not on the whole, well, with the possible exception of Spain, it's not actually a very encouraging one. And what is missing in all of them is the question about the workplace. Because undoubtedly the Egyptian revolution both was partly produced by a new wave of struggle in the workplaces, and it contributed to a struggle. But you took someone like Anne Alexandra, who studied this in detail, the sense of connection between what was happening in the streets and the squares and the workplaces is very, very tenuous. There are very few people trying to make those links and so on. And the same has to be said about M15M and the Occupy movement in the United States. The connections with other kinds of struggle are very, very tenuous. There was a banner which was dropped in Barcelona at the beginning of in May 2011, which said essentially down with the PP, down with the PSOE, and down with the UGT and the Communist Trade Union movement. To the toilet with them, in fact, it said. But nobody was putting forward any kind of discussion or program about what are we going to do about the situation in Spain's workplaces, where workers are being subjected to harassment, bullying, overwork, poor contracts, all the stuff that we know about in Britain. And that wasn't on anybody's horizon as a question. It has to be on ours. It has to be on ours. And the question is, what do we do? And so when Shanice asked, what can you do as a revolutionary other than go around preaching revolution in a sense and trying to win one or two people to revolutionary ideas? I think the answers are quite difficult. One of the reasons I really liked the book by Jane McAlevey was that she did start to ask new questions, suggest ways in which you might approach that question in different ways. She tells this story, which I'll have to be very brief about.
You've got 1 minute.
Okay, about being in Connecticut as a union organizer, being sent in as a union organizer to try and build a union in this town in Connecticut. She went and knocked on people's doors, and she said, you basically got about a minute to try and catch their attention. And the question which she asked them was, what 3 things would most change your life? And she found that none of them talked about the workplace. They all talked about the rent, the cost of housing. And so they built a union campaign which picked up what people were actually primarily concerned about. Then they built a camp on the basis of that. People then started talking about their workplaces when they had a sense that the union could actually deliver something because they delivered something on housing. So asking questions of people, which is not simply going to them and saying this is what you should be focusing on, but asking what really would change your life at work. What are the things that most concern you? Asking the question, getting into conversation with people is about what could we do if we acted together, and what are the things that we should most, that's the struggle itself and the issues posed by the struggle belong to people. Those seem possible ways forward. But I mean, I would like to have a long discussion just about all those questions, and I've run out of time. That seems to me.
You'll have to stop, I'm sorry.
I've stopped.
Very quickly, our next sort of central London meeting is currently titled Voices of the Left on the EU, a roundtable discussion, but we're currently debating different other themed titles as an alternative, and that will be in a month. And if you're interested in coming along to meetings, this form you can use to either find out more information or to join RS21, depending on what you're interested in doing. We're going to go to the pub across the road, and I believe Colin is going to lead the way.
Well, I know where it is.
For people know it, there's a pub across the road. Somebody tell me, please, sorry.